The gavel cracked like lightning through the chamber, and with it, the silence turned dangerous. Flashes from a dozen cameras cut through the heavy air, capturing every frozen expression, every flicker of anticipation. The room itself seemed to vibrate, caught between history and spectacle. Whispers slithered across the benches, gathering like a storm about to break. Then came the voice. Measured, aged, drenched in self-assurance. Alan Dershowitz, leaning forward with the confidence of a man who believed the room already belonged to him. His words carried mockery disguised as wit, a scholar's dismissal sharpened into a blade. He smirked, shaking his head slowly as if the very thought of debate with Jasmine Crockett were beneath him. Representative, your reasoning belongs in the classroom of novices, not the chambers of law. Laughter flickered on a few lips. A cough, a shuffle. The arrogance rolled through the room like smoke, suffocating, blinding, demanding compliance. But then, nothing. Jasmine Crockett did not flinch. She did not fire back. She did not even move. Her silence was heavier than any rebuttal. Eyes steady, posture unshaken, she let him fill the space with arrogance, let his confidence stretch thin, fragile as glass. Every camera froze on her face. Every whisper bent toward her stillness. The contrast was electric, his noise against her calm, his mockery against her poise. The silence no longer belonged to him. It belonged to her. The tension clawed at the walls. Dershowitz pressed harder, his voice dripping with certainty, but each word seemed to echo against the chamber's steel and lose strength. He mistook her quiet for weakness. He mistook her gaze for hesitation. He mistook her patience for surrender. The gavel struck again, sharp as thunder, demanding order where there was none. Yet the room no longer cared for order. It cared only for what would happen when the silence broke. The stage was set. The air was split. The audience leaned forward, hungry for the moment when stillness would turn to fire. But the arrogance of power always underestimates the quiet. This wasn't just a debate, it was a battle for who owned the meaning of law itself. Every spotlight glare seemed harsher than the last, painting sharp shadows across the chamber walls. Whispers rose like smoke, curling into the ears of reporters, clerks, and rivals who knew what was at stake. This wasn't an exchange of ideas. It was a collision of legacies. Alan Dershowitz carried a reputation carved over decades, a scholar whose name had been tied to constitutional battles and high-profile defenses. He arrived with authority already draped across his shoulders, the expectation that when he spoke, others listened. To many, he represented the weight of tradition, the voice of established law. To others, he was arrogance personified, a man who had learned that status could silence dissent. Across from him sat Jasmine Crockett. Younger. Fresher. Dismissed by some before she even opened her mouth. Her critics whispered that she lacked the years, the gravitas, the courtroom scars to hold her ground. But her allies knew better. Beneath the surface, beneath the calm gaze and still hands, there was steel. Logic honed not in ivory towers but in the grind of lived battles. Her strength was not in prestige but in precision. The room felt the imbalance. Reputations weighed heavy, pressing against the air. Dershowitz spoke with the practiced cadence of authority, weaving history and precedent like chains meant to bind the discussion. Crockett listened, absorbing each line, her silence daring him to underestimate her. It wasn't just a clash of arguments. It was a struggle over who defined the very rules of justice, the old guard, or the rising voice of clarity. This fight extended beyond the chamber walls. Outside, cameras waited, eager to broadcast every word, every stumble, every victory. In living rooms and offices, viewers tuned in, some rooting for tradition, others desperate for change. This was a cultural fault line disguised as debate, authority versus authenticity, status versus substance. The stakes grew clearer with every syllable. If Crockett faltered, it wouldn't simply be her defeat. It would become a headline confirming what her detractors always whispered, that youth and clarity could not match age and reputation. But if she held, if she struck with precision, it would not just shift the balance of the chamber. It would ripple outward, rewriting who had the right to define justice in this era. The air thickened with judgment. Every pause felt like a verdict waiting to be delivered. Dershowitz leaned on legacy. Crockett carried the weight of the underdog. One sought to preserve the hierarchy of power, the other aimed to break through it with nothing but truth. The clash was inevitable. The question was survival. Would silence become erasure, or would it sharpen into revelation? And Crockett knew, if she didn't seize this moment, she'd be erased from the story. For decades, his voice carried the weight of law, but tonight, that weight turned to chains. Alan Dershowitz did not arrive as a man seeking to prove himself. He arrived as someone convinced his name was proof enough. His reputation stretched back generations, tethered to classrooms, courtrooms, and television screens. To some, he was the archetype of the scholar warrior, the man who could bend constitutional theory into spectacle. To others, he was the embodiment of an era when prestige outweighed principle. His career was a mosaic of triumphs and controversies. He lectured at Harvard, wrote books that cracked bestseller lists, and appeared in high-profile defenses that tethered his name to some of the most polarizing cases in modern American law. To admirers, he was a bold defender of rights. To critics, he was a mercenary of rhetoric, a man who thrived not on clarity but on complexity, weaving arguments so dense they suffocated dissent. In chambers like these, Dershowitz played to his strengths. His tone was unhurried, each word landing as though already sanctioned by history itself. He didn't argue, he pronounced. He didn't debate, he declared. The smirk at the corner of his mouth was sharper than any citation. Every interruption was less about countering a point than about reminding the room whose voice had mattered longest. He thrived on deference. Generations of students had been trained to nod as he spoke, journalists trained to quote him, panels trained to yield. Even opponents often ceded ground before the battle began, cowed by the magnitude of his reputation. The aura of inevitability surrounded him, the assumption that his interpretation of law was not just an opinion, but an anchor. Yet arrogance shadowed authority. His confidence, once seen as mastery, now revealed cracks of dismissal. When challenged, he rarely leaned into the substance of the argument. Instead, he leaned on the scaffolding of his name. The room tonight felt this imbalance. The booming cadence, the slow dismissive shake of his head, the interruptions delivered not as questions but as verdicts. "I've been teaching constitutional law longer than you've been alive." The words were not meant to inform but to diminish, to reduce the debate into a hierarchy of years instead of clarity. Gasps didn't follow, only that suffocating silence, the kind that measured the arrogance behind the mask of prestige. Suspicion seeped through the chamber. Was this the defense of truth, or the performance of authority? Frustration bubbled in the audience, not because his arguments were too strong, but because they leaned too heavily on the presumption that no one dared to question him. Hypocrisy flickered in the air, a man championing justice, but wielding status as a weapon to silence dissent. His shadow loomed large, heavy with history, but shadows cannot hold forever. Authority can only echo so long before it fades. What he never counted on was a voice sharp enough to cut through those chains. She had walked into too many rooms where silence was expected of her, and refused every time. From the beginning, Jasmine Crockett's path was not paved with ease. She wasn't born into a legacy of political dynasties, nor did she walk corridors lined with automatic deference. Instead, her rise was carved from persistence, sharpened by doubt, and fueled by an unshakable moral compass. Where others were offered shortcuts, she was offered obstacles. And each one became the steel in her spine. Her story began in neighborhoods where voices like hers were too often dismissed, where ambition was considered audacity, and where the fight for fairness wasn't theoretical, it was survival. She carried those battles into law school, where professors underestimated her, where classmates glanced past her as if she were already out of the race. But Jasmine refused invisibility. Her questions cut sharper than lectures, her preparation deeper than appearances suggested. Every footstep echoed against marble floors as if to say, "I belong here." As an attorney, her reputation grew not because she sought headlines, but because she sought justice. Clients who had been trampled by the system found in her an advocate who wouldn't blink. Courtrooms became crucibles where her calm gaze rattled opponents, where her relentless logic dismantled walls of assumption brick by brick. She did not shout to be heard, she spoke with precision until silence itself leaned forward. By the time she entered Congress, the underdog label still clung to her, but it had become her weapon. Critics whispered that she was too untested, too unseasoned, too uncompromising. Yet compromise with injustice had never been her language. In hearings, she sat steady, eyes unblinking, waiting until the exact moment arrogance revealed its cracks. Then she struck, not with venom, but with clarity so sharp it cut arrogance to silence. Her strength was never performance. It was preparation. Each file studied, each precedent memorized, each contradiction noted until the room's power structures had nowhere left to hide. She wore dignity like armor. Calm, deliberate, relentless. Against the thunder of reputations, she stood as proof that truth did not need volume, it needed conviction. The contrast between her and men like Dershowitz could not be more stark. He relied on the weight of decades. She relied on the fire of principle. He leaned on authority already granted. She built authority with every word, every pause, every refusal to be minimized. In her presence, silence was not weakness. It was sharpened steel. Her colleagues began to notice. The cameras began to linger. Not because she played the role expected of her, but because she shattered it. The underdog energy that once threatened to erase her became the very force that made her undeniable. Pride followed, not just from allies in the chamber, but from those watching across the country, people who saw in her a reflection of their own struggles against dismissal. She embodied a reminder: dignity does not bow to arrogance, and truth does not crumble before prestige. Her journey was proof that preparation, grit, and moral clarity could outweigh even the heaviest shadow of legacy. The chamber that night wasn't just another debate. It was the culmination of every step she had taken on floors where silence had once been demanded. Every room where she was told to wait her turn. Every moment where she turned doubt into defiance, invisibility into impact. And now, the cameras burned hot, the whispers thickened, the reputations loomed. She sat calm, relentless, unshakable, a dignified force facing the weight of dismissal one more time. And now, in front of the cameras, silence was no longer an option. The words flew like daggers, each one sharper, faster, deadlier. Dershowitz's voice ricocheted through the chamber, punctuated by scoffs and calculated pauses, each one designed to unsettle. "Representative, are you certain that your understanding of precedent extends beyond your notes?" The chamber shivered at the edge of confrontation, whispers swelling like a rising tide. Every head turned. Every eye searched for a falter. Crockett remained poised. Her fingers lightly tapped a stack of documents, her eyes steady on her opponent. She let his barbs hang in the air, allowing their weight to expose the cracks in his overconfidence. He interrupted again, sharp, dismissive, attempting to assert dominance with volume. But with each intrusion, her calm replies cut through like sunlight through storm clouds. "Professor, with all due respect, precedent does not bend to arrogance." Her words were measured, precise, but they carried force enough to still the whispers momentarily. The chamber's air grew thick with tension, a quiet storm bracing to break. Every syllable, every pause, became a battle in itself. Dershowitz leaned back, smirk tightening. His rebuttals became layered with condescension, dense with references meant to intimidate. But Crockett anticipated, countered, and dismantled, logic puncturing pomp. The room felt the imbalance shifting subtly. The momentum that once favored authority now trembled. Each interruption he attempted was met with her patience. Each mocking tone, with her composure. The audience held their breath as the verbal chessboard extended. Senators, aides, journalists, none had seen the underdog withstand such sustained precision. Her arguments were small blades striking at the armor of prestige. Each point forced him to react, falter, reframe. Whispers became murmurs, murmurs became gasps. Cameras caught every micro-expression, the tightening jaw, the slight blink, the flutter of a note falling on the desk. Suspense coiled in the chamber like a living thing. Careers, reputations, legacies, all hung on the edge of her next word. The tension reached a fever pitch as Dershowitz attempted one final, sweeping condemnation, aiming to overpower with authority. But Crockett's calm logic, steady and relentless, had begun to erode the spectacle he relied upon. Her silence between lines became a weapon, her deliberate pauses, a scalpel carving through assumption. The room froze on her next inhale, waiting for the strike that would either crush or redeem. Every breath was short. Every eye locked. Every heartbeat measured against the weight of consequence. But the deadliest strike was still to come. Her voice didn't rise, it cut, clean and cold, like steel through silk. Every eye snapped to her as she began, measured, deliberate, unyielding. Dershowitz's smirk faltered the instant her first point landed. She dismantled assumption with surgical precision, each sentence a scalpel slicing through the armor of arrogance. The chamber held its breath, the air thick as if waiting for the storm to break. Authority does not grant immunity from scrutiny, and reputation does not replace reason. The words landed with the weight of inevitability. Murmurs died mid-phrase. Cameras zoomed, flashes stuttered, capturing her calm resolve. Every head turned, every heartbeat synchronized to the rhythm of truth meeting power. She pressed forward, relentless. When precedent is wielded selectively, it becomes a tool of convenience, not justice. The phrase echoed off the high ceilings. Gasps rippled through the room. Even the aides who had arrived certain of the outcome leaned in, caught in the gravity of her clarity. Dershowitz opened his mouth, only to find the syllables faltering. Her calm exposed his overconfidence, revealed the hollow spaces in his argument. Her logic was clinical, precise, unwavering. Each counterpoint stacked upon the last, a fortress of reason against the siege of hubris. Dismissal without engagement is not debate. Mockery without understanding is not argument. Silence cannot substitute for insight. The chamber was silent, but the silence roared. Every whisper seemed to amplify her words, every camera froze on her face, recording the moment that would ripple beyond these walls. He attempted a counter, a bluff of intellect meant to regain footing. But Crockett anticipated. She struck again. History does not crown the loudest voice, it crowns the most consistent and principled one. Authority untempered by ethics is a hollow thing. Heads turned sharply, even journalists scribbling notes paused mid-sentence. Her cold logic was undeniable. She did not need to shout. Her precision did all the work. Whispers grew into murmurs, murmurs into awe. Every pause was a calculated weapon, each measured exhale a claim to the moral high ground. The audience in the chamber leaned forward, caught between disbelief and admiration. Cameras rolled, capturing her dismantling a legend in real time. Within an hour, the clip exploded online. Hashtags trended nationwide. Hashtag rule of law surged across platforms. Analysts dissected each line. Commentators replayed the calm ferocity of her delivery. She was no longer just a representative in the room. She had become a symbol. The underdog rewriting what it meant to confront arrogance with dignity. Dershowitz shifted in his chair, finally realizing the narrative was no longer his to command. Every syllable of his attempted dominance had been neutralized, replaced by the irresistible clarity of her reasoning. The chamber, once his stage, had become her witness. Her eyes never wavered. Her posture never faltered. Her calm was not submission, it was sovereignty. Each line built momentum, and with each word, the legacy of authority crumbled, revealed for what it truly was, brittle, performative, dependent on unchallenged assumptions. The final blow came not in volume, but in the unwavering logic of principle. Power is not measured by the fear it elicits. It is measured by the justice it upholds. The room exhaled as one, a thunderous quiet, charged with awe and disbelief. Dershowitz's smirk had vanished, replaced by recognition. He had underestimated her. He had underestimated the quiet. And as the silence thundered, the aftershocks had only just begun. Within minutes, the echoes spilled beyond the chamber walls. News alerts pinged on every device, each chime carrying a weight that felt almost tangible. Social feeds exploded. Clips of Crockett's calm dismantling of Dershowitz went viral, replayed, paused, dissected. Hashtags surged. Hashtag rule of law. Hashtag underdog victory. Hashtag dignity prevails. Every swipe, every scroll carried whispers of astonishment and admiration. The media buzzed like a live wire. Commentators parsed each line, each pause, each subtle glance. Analysts recalibrated, realizing that the narrative had shifted in real time. What was expected to be a routine display of established authority had become a masterclass in controlled power. The underdog had not just survived, she had redefined the terms of engagement. Inside political circles, reactions rippled unpredictably. Allies who had doubted her capacity now saw the sharp precision in her delivery. Some competitors, once confident in their own security, glanced nervously at one another, calculating how this shift might alter future battles. Every whispered conversation carried the tension of realignment. Every reputation, from veteran pundit to junior aide, felt the tremor of change. Dershowitz, for the first time in decades, appeared human, vulnerable, unsettled, diminished. The certainty he relied on dissolved in the wake of her logic. His voice, once a commanding echo, now stumbled, his posture stiffened, his eyes scanning for allies who were no longer there. Prestige alone could not defend against the clarity she had delivered. Meanwhile, Crockett's stature rose with every replay. Across chambers, offices, and living rooms, admiration swelled. Viewers marveled at her calm command. Citizens shared clips, dissected her reasoning, and praised the dignity with which she met arrogance. In a single afternoon, she had become both a political force and a cultural touchstone, proof that preparation and principle could outweigh years of inherited authority. Even rival politicians, previously certain of the hierarchy, paused to reassess. The room of influence was now unsettled, a landscape shifting beneath familiar feet. For the first time, everyone recognized that her presence demanded respect, not because she shouted louder, but because she held truth steady while chaos sought to drown it. And yet, amid the surge of acclaim, the quiet tension remained. Every victory carries the shadow of what comes next. Every wave of applause hints at the new challenges that follow. Crockett had won the moment, but the currents of politics never rest. The chamber, the media, the nation, all waited to see how her triumph would ripple outward, how it would be defended, and how it might be contested. But even in victory, the question remained, what would come next? The battle was over, but the lesson was eternal. The chamber, once charged with tension and derision, now hummed with a quiet reverence. Light filtered through high windows, casting long shadows that softened into gold. Where arrogance had once loomed, only clarity remained. Jasmine Crockett sat poised, her calm presence a testament to the enduring power of principle over pretense. Arrogance, for all its bluster, had crumbled under the weight of reason. Dershowitz's authority, built over decades, now appeared brittle, impressive in stature but hollow in essence. What remained was a lesson in integrity. Truth, methodically and patiently applied, cannot be overshadowed by legacy alone. Crockett's composure had not only dismantled arguments, it had illuminated the path for others who had been silenced by status or reputation. Her victory was not measured by applause or headlines, though both followed. It was measured by the subtle, enduring shift she created, a reminder that dignity demands recognition and that logic, when wielded without malice, commands respect. Every gesture, every precise rebuttal, radiated the quiet strength of someone who knew that justice was earned through clarity and courage, not volume or spectacle. Across the chamber, colleagues and onlookers felt the weight of her example. Young lawyers, aspiring politicians, and citizens watching from afar glimpsed a standard rarely seen in public life, the triumph of prepared, patient reason over the thunder of assumed authority. Every eye that followed her left with a renewed understanding that brilliance and integrity often appear in the spaces where confidence meets humility. Crockett's cold logic became a symbol. A reminder that even in the most performative halls of power, truth carries an unstoppable force. Her calm, deliberate actions had cut through the clamor, showing that the loudest voice is not always the strongest, and that history favors those who act with principle rather than ego. In that moment, hope emerged. Not the fleeting hope of partisan victory, but the enduring hope that clarity and morality can reclaim spaces dominated by arrogance. The audience, the nation, and the future of discourse had witnessed that integrity is not passive, it is active, precise, and unyielding. The gavel's echo had faded, but the moral resonance remained. It spoke of patience, preparation, and the courage to uphold dignity when all eyes are upon you. Crockett's triumph was not mere performance. It was a blueprint for how truth can withstand, and ultimately outshine, decades of assumed supremacy. And yet, in politics, victory is never the end, only the beginning. The gavel fell one last time, not on silence, but on clarity. The chamber exhaled, the echoes of debate lingering like smoke in sunlight. Cameras dimmed, whispers faded, and the weight of truth settled into every corner. Jasmine Crockett rose, not with triumph in her voice, but with dignity radiating from every gesture. The lesson was clear: arrogance can dominate the room, but integrity shapes the story. Across screens nationwide, viewers paused, replayed, reflected. Social feeds buzzed with admiration, hashtags commemorated the moment, and conversations sparked about the power of calm, reasoned conviction. The underdog had reshaped the narrative, proving that preparation and principle can turn the tide of even the most entrenched authority. This was a dramatized political showdown. Yet the message resonates beyond fiction: courage, clarity, and dignity endure where hubris collapses. Pause. Reflect. Learn. Share the story, discuss its lessons, and subscribe to follow the journeys that reveal how truth and integrity confront power. The chamber doors closed, the lights dimmed, but the resonance remained. Every echo hinted at challenges ahead, every shadow suggested vigilance. And in that quiet promise, one certainty remained: the next battle is already waiting.